Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're back after the summer, back in our usual Tuesday evening slot. And joining me tonight, we have a familiar face, our chairman, Michael Willis. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Richard. Good to see you back.
We've got lots to talk about tonight. As I've got the comments up, do make comments. Those of you, obviously, you'll be thinking about commenting that we've both got great suntans, obviously. But I mean, don't bother with that. I mean, everyone will be thinking that. But do put your comments in on the issues that we're going to discuss. As I say, we've got lots of them this evening, as usual. All right, Scottish Family Party is just gearing up at the moment. We'll be having meetings around the country in the weeks to come. We've got a meeting in Dundee on the 7th of September. We're planning to go up to Highlands and Islands a bit as well, back up to Orkney, probably go to Stornoway, Elgin as well. We're hoping to have a meeting in Elgin before too long, as well as the familiar places, maybe Fraserburgh, Peterhead, Aberdeen, Inverness, etc., etc. So we'll be out and about. Well, not necessarily me personally, but there'll be Scottish Family Party meetings in those places. Now, the first couple of things I've got are relating to my holiday in Switzerland. Now, Michael, you've been to Switzerland more than once, is that right?
Yeah, I've been a regular visitor to Basel and Zurich, and it's a great country. So, and it is just so efficient. Mm-hmm. Works like clockwork, as they say. So that's where you've been, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, it's fascinating. Two little snippets I found particularly interesting. You know, everything costs a fortune in Switzerland, extremely expensive. So I was looked up online. Why are things so expensive in Switzerland? And the suggestion was, is it that people who work in shops have to be paid a lot more money? And apparently, in Switzerland, people who work in shops, they do get more money, but it actually costs the employer less to pay them than it would do here. So how about that for best of both worlds? Because their tax rates are so low that for a certain amount of money you're spending on your employees, in Switzerland, they'd get paid more. It was amazing. It was fantastic. So surely that must be the aim for any country, to end up with a situation where the workers get more and it costs the employers less. Surely that's the winning formula for everyone. So we're somewhere away from that in Scotland, I think. But that was interesting. And the other thing interesting in Switzerland is that we do house swaps. And the house we stayed in was in a sort of concrete housing development from the 60s or 70s. And if it was in Scotland, it would be called a scheme. And if it was in Scotland, you'd probably expect it might have more than its fair share of broken glass around it and social problems, shall we say. But in Switzerland, it was pristine. Lovely plants everywhere, outdoor facilities. It was just it wasn't perfect, but it was basically the way the architects and planners intended. It was quite lovely. I thought it was quite an eye-opener, because sometimes people look at these 60s and 70s housing developments and say, oh, look, it's inevitable. The architects got it all wrong. That's what causes the problems. But I'm not so sure. The house we stayed in this sort of concrete 70s or 60s development, but they had a Steinway grand piano in the living room, which you probably wouldn't find in a similar place in Scotland. But I think to me, it was just like a little experiment that seemed to be pointing towards the conclusion that the architecture isn't actually to blame. There's other factors that actually decide what a community is going to be like. Would you agree with Michael? Do you think architects get the blame unnecessarily with these things sometimes?
Well, I mean, Switzerland does combine beautifully the modern with the traditional. And of course, there's those beautiful rural villages. I mean, there are some great designers in Switzerland, and their town planning is sort of second to none. But I think that's down to the direct democracy, isn't it? These local plebiscites. And there really is power to local communities or the cantons to decide, what's best for them. Mm-hmm. And so that might have a lot to say with the state you found of that urban environment, how tidy it is, that they're very proud of their local communities.
Yeah. Just to mention Scottish Family Party policy, we're very open and positive about referenda. on all sorts of issues. We just think, cut out the politicians, let the people have their say. On a lot of issues, you'd find you get out, and from my point of view, more sensible results by doing that. There are people who've looked at ways, I mean, with electronic technology now, there are all sorts of ways that this could be done on quite a grand scale, to the point where almost everything that's voted on the parliament, you can invite the population to log on to the government website with their pass card or whatever and vote. You can end up having like referenda just weekly, even if you want to do. The technology is there to do this very quickly and easily, if that was thought to be the way people wanted to go. There'd obviously be security issues. That's quite a complex issue. But I think it's worth exploring some of these things. At the very least, get an advisory vote on it. Even if it's not binding, just find out, get a snapshot of public opinion that's much better than an opinion poll. Do you think there's mileage in that, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is mileage in that, and that's always been in our sort of manifesto. But the closest we've got to it, I suppose, are these consultations, which invariably the government have made up their mind, the answer they want. You get a consultation, and about 90% are against the government's idea, but that gets kicked into the long grass, and that government decision is carried forward. So they appear to be consulting, but in fact are treating us with utter disdain.
Yeah, I've got a case in point of that. I had an email a little while ago from an organization that's been paid by the government to do research about buffer zones around abortion clinics. Now, the government has been absolutely unequivocal, saying we are going to do this without a shadow of doubt. This is what we're doing. But in order for them to be able to tick the box to say they've consulted, they're trying to find people who've taken part in the vigils who will have a chat with them. So I said, okay, I'll have a chat. So she started off by saying, abortion healthcare facilities. Said, whoa, hang on. You just explained to me how you're supposed to be, you're neutral and you're trying to be open-minded, and yet you use a term like that, abortion healthcare. So it just shows that don't even understand what neutrality would be on the issue. I also said to the young lady, I said, obviously the government has already made their mind up. So this just is a box ticking exercise, isn't it? Okay, you're getting paid, obviously, you're quite happy to do it, but that's what it is. She didn't agree, but she didn't disagree either. Let's put it that way. But apparently the government spent £10,000 on this this sort of consultants firm to conduct these interviews, knowing full well it's a total waste of time, and they're going to ignore everything that they hear. So it's undemocratic to pretend to be consulting when you made your mind up. It's also just a waste of money, complete waste of money for the government. Maybe I want to mention one more thing. People are saying here about not getting notifications for the live stream. Facebook in general has decimated our reach recently. It used to be we put a post up and routinely get 100 likes and shares or whatever, but now it would be like 10, and overnight absolutely crushed all of our figures. Now I think that might be that they've changed their algorithm in a way that disfavors news, current affairs, politics type content. It's maybe prioritizing people having their lunch in a restaurant type stuff. I understand that might be a general thing, but yeah, YouTube is certainly, we're not in their good books, and we're not in Facebook's good books either. But I think also they've changed their algorithm, which has reduced our reach. Right, Bruce is asking about IndieRef 2. We'll save that maybe for later. I'm going to mention one more thing very quickly, and then we're going to go into the main topic we've got lined up. I just wanted to mention by-elections. We're a political party, so we stand in elections. So there's a by-election coming up in, I think it's called Tain and Easter Ross is the ward name. Another one in a ward in South Ayrshire. I think it's Girvan, and there's more to the name. Anyway, it's in South Ayrshire in any case. So we're looking for candidates for those wards. So if you live or work in South Ayrshire, or Highland council area, then you might be the person who would be ideal to do that. A candidate who is very active, you get a leaflet, go and campaign, great. But just being on the ballot paper is really valuable as well. So even if you don't see yourself, or you're very busy, don't see yourself doing much in the way of campaigning, we'd still like someone to go on the ballot paper in those two areas. So do let us know. And then the biggie, the Westminster by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. We will be announcing our candidates very shortly. So watch this space. Then we're going to have an exciting campaign full of fireworks and activity and all sorts. All sorts is going to be going on with regard to that. 2nd and 9th of September, Saturdays, put those dates in your diary. We're going to launch the campaign on the 2nd of September, I think, in the constituency. We're going to have an action day on the 9th. So if you can make it along to those, great. What do you guess our candidate? If you want to put in the comments, guess our candidate, or you think you'd like to be our candidate, then you can have a guess. But we're not going to tell you. But we'll be announcing our candidate very shortly, and then we're really going to throw ourselves into that campaign, because it's an opportunity for us to communicate with voters and just get media exposure. So it's an opportunity for us not to be missed. So the Westminster by-election, are you looking forward to that, Michael? Who's going to win it, do you think? If you had to give a tip, who do you think is going to win it?
I would say it looks like Labour, doesn't it? The same party that supported the SNP's transgender bill, the same party that just doesn't say anything, so they don't make any blunders or mistakes. But that's a great area to campaign in. I think our message will go down really well in terms of young families. There's some, because with the Pro-Life Alliance, we did a lot of work at in Hamilton in a number of elections and by-elections, and got some fairly good results. But great bunch of people who are have got common sense.
I think I saw recently that was it that? I don't know, maybe it was Coat Bridge was saying is the highest concentration of Catholics in Scotland. So I don't know how much of that goes down into Rutherglen, Hamilton.
Yeah, definitely Rutherglen, very Catholic area.
Yeah,
so a lot of natural supporters.
Right. How did you? That was supposed to be confidential. Okay, just keep that quiet. So we're not announcing that yet. Right, so John. Right, I won't be the candidate because we've got a candidate who lives in the constituency. He lives in the constituency, and he is going to be fantastic. So keep guessing, people. Keep guessing. Right, we'll move on to our main billing, which is a topic that Michael wanted to talk about. And I'm keen to talk about it as well. It's going to be interesting. So, Michael, do you want to take it away with ESG?
Yeah. The role of capitalism in Scotland, and the role of the company in Scotland, because I think when you're in Switzerland, this fantastic story broke about Nigel Farage being cancelled by Coutts Bank. And this story's had so much traction, is running, and fair play to Mr. Farage to keep it running, and on fairly limited resources. And he's uncovering a lot of things that obviously the Treasury and the Westminster government were unaware of. And it's this sort of penetration of sort of the woke ideas into our major banks. And of course, in my previous life, I mean, I hate to admit it, but I spent 17 years as a consultant advising boards on corporate governance, how companies are governed, how corporations are governed, and what is the role of the director. And this has come sort of full circle. So I thought I've got some experience to offer here, and I think there are some opportunities for the Scottish Family Party. But essentially, a company in the past would primarily be set up by the shareholders to earn a return for the shareholders, because they take a risk, they form a company, have their articles of association, set up a memorandum, and they risk their capital, and the shareholders are expecting a return. But over, since the 1970s, and probably with New Labour, there was this talk about a third way, a new way of a new softer capitalism, which takes into account the interests of other shareholders. And you remember a guy called Milton Friedman, this sort of tough Thatcherite economic advisor to Reagan. He always said that capitalism is all about serving the interests of the shareholder. And if you provide a dividend for shareholders, then everybody benefits. Employees keep their jobs, suppliers can go on supplying to those companies. The local community still has that plant or factory or office within their community. The creditors, everyone benefits. So all those stakeholders benefit. And now we've got this complete changeover to stakeholder capitalism, where a board of directors who are representing the interests of the company has to serve equally all these stakeholders. And I think that's a great way for taking your eye off the ball and not making any profit, because you're serving everyone. Mm-hmm. And so we've got this transformation in capitalism, which I, for one, argued against, because when they changed the Companies Act, and these Companies Acts since about 1844 have been dictating how companies are the legal background for companies. And in 2005, I think it was, there was a new Companies Act, and that brought in this legislation that all boards should have due regard to the interests of stakeholders. Now, the frightening thing which has come to light with Nigel's investigation is that companies are signing up to something called B Corp. And that's even a more extreme form of stakeholder capitalism, where they're expecting the members who sign up to commit to changing their articles of association to have a new purpose, which is this environmental, social, and governance purpose, rather than serving the shareholders. And they have to enshrine that in law, and that's extremely dangerous. And of course, in Scotland, we've got this ridiculous thing called Can Be, where B Corp have signed up with the Scottish government to form Can Be, and I quote, which is a green, inclusive, well-being economy, which we're trying to create in Scotland. I mean, you can't think of anything sort of more crazy. I mean, this invariably leads to more taxation. We've got a massive public sector in Scotland. We need to be liberating businesses, not them feeling they should sign up to these harebrained schemes. And I think the problem is, and I think this is the opportunity for the Scottish Family Party, is that Victorian companies, Edwardian companies, the older fashioned companies, there's a great sense of duty. And, there is a legal requirement for directors to act in good faith. And I know you're always training our candidates. You've got to act in good faith in the best interest of the party. Directors are supposed to act in good faith in the best interest of the company. And there was a sort of an old fashioned honesty, integrity. These were the real values. These were the values of the past. And now the new values are equity, inclusion, racial equality, environmentalism. And then someone like Nigel Farage is, for them, the Antichrist. And I found this quote about him. They said in this dossier from the National Westminster Bank, and don't forget, these charlatans are hiding under the name of NatWest, because it's the Royal Bank of Scotland, the toxic bank that almost wrecked the world economy. That these charlatans wrote about Nigel He said he visited Djokovic, the tennis player, at his home in Serbia, and quote, as you know, it showed him to be that showed the spineless, chaotic behavior of a chancer. I mean, what a disgrace. So his subject access requests sort of reveal this great big dossier of vitriol and hatred. So his values, Nigel Farage's values, liking Trump, Brexit, favorably disposed towards Djokovic, those values don't align with these the new values, the new woke values, which most of these corporations are just borrowing because they don't. I mean, a value is something. What do you value in life? What's important to you in life? Fortunately, for many of us, we have lasting values that we want to incorporate in our business life and the way companies are run. And but for others, they just borrow these secondhand values, like Nike using the American football player who was taking the knee, using and when the American flag was raised and the national anthem, the anthem of America was sung, he was on his knees. Or the Cafe Nero with the child with the amputated breasts on the side of a truck. These are just borrowed, secondhand, meaningless values. And I suppose in the future, of course, all those values will get dumped in the big revolution that they want to, the cultural Marxist revolution they want to introduce into Scotland and in many other countries. Those people immediately go to the gulags. They don't care at all about transgender people or Black Lives Matter. So it's a very dangerous, I don't know to what extent you agree with this, Richard. It's a dangerous global, this is true globalism, the globalism of ideology, the globalism of economics, the globalism of financial markets, that it's a tidal wave and nobody is standing up to them. And but I was so excited whilst you were away in Switzerland that Nigel took out this subject access request, something he had never heard of, which surprised me. And I think in all my battles with being cancelled, that's one of the first things I did. And I came across a great vitriolic set of minutes about me. So I think there's a bit of a roller coaster here. And so, the capitalists have been attacked by woke. They're borrowing their sets of values. They think they have some sort of meaning, but we've toppled two executives on about 3.5 million. I hope there are more heads to follow, and that we put a stop to this madness, which is not going to provide us. I'm sorry, I'm sort of ranting a bit now. They're not going to provide economic security to Scotland. They're not going to provide any solutions for us. And sadly, all those medium-sized companies, these smaller companies who aren't listed on stock exchanges and don't have to conform to all the sort of corporate governance criteria, but even they're getting attracted to this, to these woke values. So I think it provides an opportunity for us in terms of economic policy, but I would say this is a highly dangerous development. So that's my sort of intro to.
Yeah, absolutely. I entirely agree. I was talking to Michael about this the other day, and I said I'd read this book recently, Inside the Corporate Social Justice Scam. And it's written by a fellow called Vivek Ramaswamy, who's now a contender to be the Republican nominee to be president. And I think he's in third place at the moment, apparently gaining on DeSantis. I don't know much about him, about this book. I watched a couple of things on YouTube about it as well, but it's really interesting. So a few things to say. Further on, I think these banks, it's as though they'd never heard of a subject access request as well. I mean, if we were dealing with a tricky issue in the Scottish Family Party, I wouldn't put a load of stuff like that in an email or some sort of document. You might have a chat on the phone or over a cup of coffee sometime. But they put all this down. They should realize that's going to be hugely embarrassing for you when a subject access request comes in. All this will be exposed, but it's that they didn't know. I don't know if you saw the story as well, equally concerning. It got a bit of publicity. The vicar, I think it was in Yorkshire, and his building society, I can't remember who it was, his building society sent him a questionnaire saying, how are we doing? And he replied, one of the things he put in the feedback was that he doesn't appreciate the transgender preaching that he gets on their website or whatever, or when he goes into the branch. And they closed his account about it. So I think Christian Concern were fighting that one. I don't know how that's going to end up. Then there was Core Issues Trust, the Christian organization that helps people who want to leave LGBT lifestyles, identities, whatever. They were debanked by Barclays. So they took Barclays to court and they won. Barclays had to pay out, I think it was £20,000. I don't know if they had to reinstate their account, but in any case, Core Issues Trust won and Barclays off. But it seems these companies are very slow to learn. They're so convinced that their sort of progressive values are automatically right and will win in any arena, that they don't need to worry about being taken to court. But I think it's not that simple. But things from the book. I mean, I agree with what the book says. I mean, basically, the reason the companies do this is to make more money. They think it helps them to make money. Because if you pretend you're actually more bothered about racial justice and whatever, they think that'll make people more likely to buy their ice cream or their coffee. And so it's like the best of both worlds. They feel like they're doing good. People think they're doing good, whereas actually underneath it, that they're just trying to get richer. Do you think that's true?
Well, I mean, that guy, the chief executive of, was it Wix? He said, oh, anybody who's against transgenderism is a bigot and they're not welcome in my store. And I think a lot of people just decided I'm not going into Wix for a while.
I actually heard that by coincidence within an hour of me thinking I was going to go to Wix. I'm not sure I've ever been before in my life, but I was going to go for something.
There you go.
But then Mary told me what happened, and that was that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I genuinely think there's segments, they believe that segments of the market support this. I mean, I know Ben and Jerry's, they're always at the forefront of this sort of stuff. Yeah. And I mean, they have some good policies. I mean, they within their company, they believe the highest paid member of the company should be earning no more than 5 times the average salary of every member of the company, which is, and especially since we've seen those figures from the high pay unit come out yesterday, which showed that, the 100 top listed companies in the UK, the top directors got a 16% increase compared to the UK average of about 4 or 5%. So, I mean, that's in a way, governance is all about controlling these excessive wages. And if you remember in the 1980s, all the water boards were privatized, and suddenly these chief execs were trousering massive salaries. And companies like Polypec, they were ripping off the shareholders, and the chief executive of Polypec sort of ran off to Cyprus, and he had to be brought back to face trial. But Ben and Jerry's innocent fruit juice, they're big into this. And sadly, and I shall never have one of their fish pies again, is Charlie Bigham's. They make these lovely sort of fish pies, and it comes in a sort of a wooden, a bamboo sort of case, and it's very sort of, they do a whole range of sort of ready meals, but very nice ingredients. Charlie Bigham's. Don't buy another ready meal from them. I mean, they're in Waitrose, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and Alpro. They're big. Alpro, this sort of fancy sort of milk product, which I do see a lot of on the shelves, and I think it's very fashionable. And this B Corp thing, there are actually aisles. There's an aisle in Waitrose which has all the B Corp products in one part of the aisle to say, well, these are our exclusive environmentally friendly, sustainable, net zero suppliers to Waitrose.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then Ocado, on their website, they have a special aisle of B Corp suppliers. So, I mean, this is the other end of it, that if you don't have B Corp recognition, you're not on the supplier list.
No. But in terms of accountability, Vivek said in his book, if a company says, we're not accountable to our shareholders, we're accountable to everyone. Well, how does everyone feed back to you? I mean, that means you're accountable to no one. But what it becomes, though, they become accountable to the government, because the government sets standards that they need to adhere to. And then it becomes, instead of being accountable to shareholders, you're accountable to the government. I think a lot of governments are very happy for that situation. That's what happens. And I've always thought another thing behind this, the reason companies go down this line so much is that they're scared of the real economic left-wingers. They're scared of the real socialists. If you're running a big business that basically you're out to make lots of money, then there are people on the left of politics who don't like you and think you hadn't ought to be doing that. And they'll think you're bad people for doing that. But now the current left of politics can be bought off so easily. All you have to do is put a few rainbow flags up and BLM messages or whatever, give some money to the UN Women's Foundation. And that's it. Most of the modern left will think, you're a great company. It's really fantastic what you're doing. And the company thinks, right, this is a good deal, because they should really be hating us, because we're a multinational company who are just trying to screw every last penny out of as many people as we can and pay our workers as little as we can. But they think we're wonderful if we just do these things. And I'm sure that's a big factor. And it is remarkable how effective it is. Because it's not too long ago, is it, when the sort of hard left would be against global corporations, full stop. They were just the baddies, and they would be out smashing their windows and calling them all sorts, calling for boycotts. But that just seems to have been dealt with. They've dissipated it. They've neutralized it by going for their social justice message.
Yeah, it's very clever. I mean, you're right. In the 1970s, it was all the MNCs, wasn't it? The multinational corporations were hated. Yeah. I mean, so France despised them as these corporations changing the French culture, changing the French language, and they would riot against them. But I think on the back of globalism and the globalization of brands, brands are more benign than company names. It's Cartier, it's Nike, it's Adidas. They sort of hide behind that brand franchise. They're still using sweated labor. They're operating all over the world in the lowest cost economies, but they're waving these flags, these gestures. They're making these gestures, and they're continuing to increase their profits. But when they do these crazy things like Bud Light and these sponsorship deals, and Target, one of the big retailers in the States, they took a really big hit. I think their share price lost about 15% of the value of the share price when they went all pro-trans. So the ordinary common sense punter in the street, can fight back. But these are massive forces. And I think once capitalism, the great independence of capitalism, who want nothing to do with the state, nothing to do with regulation, and is overall is a force for good around the world, and raises the standards of living around the world. It's an imperfect system. But once the regulators get hold of it, and they're, in the case of Nigel Farage, the regulators are in cahoots with the people they're supposed to be regulating.
Yeah. Although Vivek in his book, he said something a bit similar to what you were saying there. There's some big companies, they're cozying up to dictators, and they're operating in countries with very unsavory leadership, and they're making all sorts of compromises with them, pretty grubby deals, really. Whereas at home, they create this impression that they're saving the world, that they're the genuine moral heroes of the age. And it's just amazing that they managed to do that. They must sit around in the boardroom sometimes just just laughing, thinking this is just bizarrely easy. Because again, if you went back maybe 20 years, the scrutiny of big companies would be you're working with such and such a dodgy person, you're supplying dodgy things to this person, but that's just all. Also, I mean, just in general, like worldwide issues, things like world hunger doesn't really get a look in anymore. Countries where there's inadequate medical care, no one seems particularly bothered anymore. If you've got a country where girls don't go to school, then wow. I mean, we're on the point of sending in the army to sort them out. I think country, and that's not right. Countries that are doing that. But what about all the other issues? So it's only the issues that align with this narrow range of sort of progressive and the progressive agenda that attract attention, whereas much more fundamental issues that they've fallen off the agenda. They just seem to be ignored from now on.
And then a related issue. I mean, I saw that the World Bank has decided no more development funding is going into Uganda because of their anti-LGBT laws. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the World Bank is the main, has this massive multiplier effect that the capital they put in terms of investment brings in a lot of other overseas capital that, $1 million from the World Bank generates another 10 million on the back of that. So the big corporations don't like the fact that Uganda's not getting in line because they they want to be putting their money in there. So this, I mean, it is this globalist agenda is changing everything. And once capitalism is captured, we have a massive problem. But I do think it goes right back to individual directors who act on behalf of the company, not acting in good faith, not making honest decisions, having not having the integrity, which I think they had in the old, in past times where they, directors resigned. They said, look, we failed the company, we should go. But now they're leaving everything to the regulator. Oh, we can't make a decision. Of course, the chairman of NatWest should have resigned straight away. Yeah. He should have gone immediately, but no, he kicks everything into the long grass and hopes to hang on to just top up his pension. Yeah.
So here's a few more things from Vivek. He came up with a proposal. It sounded quite sensible to me. That companies have a lot of legal benefits, like limited liability. So if a company goes bust, the owners of it, they don't lose everything they own. It's self-contained, if you like. So it limits the risk that people take. And there's various other legal benefits of being registered as a company. And they're saying they should be restricted solely to the organizations that function as companies. If they want to function as political campaigning groups or lobby groups, then that's not covered by the legislation for a company. You need to set up something alongside yourself to do that. And that is going to have to bear the risks. That seemed quite sensible. I don't know how far-reaching and effective that sort of plan could be, but I think that's certainly worth looking at, because that's not what companies are for. All the laws to do with companies, it's to do with enabling businesses to function. But if they're not really operating as a business, if they're operating as a business with a political campaigning organization attached to it, then I think that needs.
I think that sounds like he's using American examples. I mean, I know here we have other forms of organization which have some protection. Things like companies limited by guarantee, so social things like golf clubs or groups of individuals getting together for a social purpose. They'll have a slightly different formation and different articles of association and sort of different liabilities. But I think we're tougher here in terms of political campaigning under, as say a subsidiary of a registered company.
Right.
But it sounds like, so are you recommending that to us, that book, Richard?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I think a lot of the problem with these things is they're not regarded as political. It's in Scotland, if you stick a rainbow flag with the transgender chevrons in it, if you put that up, that's regarded as non-political. So like the Edinburgh Fringe programme has got the transgender flag on the front of it. and that's funded by the Scottish Government and Edinburgh Council and all sorts of other government bodies. Now, I would say that's quite clearly the government funding something that is then presenting a skewed political message. But the culture in Scotland is that that's not political. That's why you can teach it in schools. These are not political controversies. And the reason they're not seen as political controversies is because the Scottish Family Party is not in the Scottish Parliament yet. Once we are, no one will be able to say that this, like the transgender flag, that's just a version of being a nice person. Because there's someone in the Scottish Parliament saying, well, no, we don't agree with that symbol. That's against our party policies. And hopefully that would break that. Something else you were saying was interesting, was a lot of investment companies now are basing their decisions on this ESG thinking. So they won't invest in so-called sin stocks. Yeah. So what that is inevitably going to do is distort the market, and it's going to create an asset bubble around companies that tick all the right boxes. And what's likely to happen in those cases is there might be exuberance in the market, and the value of shares in companies that tick all these boxes are going to grow and grow and grow to an unrealistic degree. And then there could be the bubble will burst and it will crash. That's quite likely, I think. I don't know if that's imminent, but at some point that's going to happen. But also for investors, probably investing in arms manufacturers, surely it's got to be better value for money, because there are huge investment companies that are refusing to invest in them now. So you get a better return on it because the prices will be lower. As far as I'm concerned, manufacturing arms is sort of morally neutral or even a positive thing in many contexts. It depends who they're selling them to. That's the important thing. But the very fact that they're manufacturing arms isn't a problem to me. But to a lot of big investors, it is a problem, and they automatically won't touch it. And so that's where that's where the bargains will be on the stock exchange.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, definitely Blackrock and Vanguard own about 9% of the equity of worldwide listed companies, and with that 9%, they can call for directors to be fired, change some of the directors. So they have enormous power, even with just 9%. But basically, if you're not on side with BlackRock or Vanguard and you don't, and they insist on all the ESG numbers and to see the environmental, social, and governance audits are carried out, and you're improving against these standards, you're going to have a problem with those investors. But it's quite interesting that, this is creating a bubble, because obviously if you're basing investment decisions purely on that, I mean, there are some great companies who think ESG is a total waste of money. And I'm thinking of our good friends from the pub trade, where we sometimes have our meetings. And we have our meetings in Stirling in this particular pub. Tim, there's a guy called Tim, he's the chairman. And in his annual report, he the whole time saying, we don't conform to any governance or environmental or social standards. We have our own standards and we meet those standards. Weatherspoons. Weatherspoons is the company. So that's a listed company. But he's one of the few brave people who put their heads over the parapet. So, the sin stocks can be, although defense must be having a wonderful time rearming Ukraine. I mean, there's a constant flow of weapons in there, and it's a bugbear of mine is nobody's suing for a peaceful solution. We desperately need that. So even though it's a sin stock, the American government are making the decisions to put in arms into Ukraine, and it's a constant flow of arms. I know a lot of it is secondhand, not fully serviceable. There isn't the backup, but that could be a good invest. Are we recommending that as an investment to our listeners and viewers? Wow. Get into arms.
Another story from the book was quite striking. It was Unilever. They'd got some sort of campus, some sort of plant somewhere in a poor country. I can't remember the details of the story. Plant in a poor country. And it had its security system. It was quite a dangerous country. And one day the place was basically attacked by some sort of marauding gangsters who is really appalling. People killed, substantial number of women. I think it might have been 56 women raped at Unilever's employees. A really terrible incident. And afterwards, some of the employees, were not happy with how Unilever responded, and so some of them say, we want compensation. Your security was inadequate. We need more help, support, whatever, going forward. And Unilever fought these people tooth and nail, got the best lawyers they could on the case. All these women who've been raped, they fought against them, just tried to eliminate their claims. Meanwhile, Unilever was giving huge sums of money to the UN Women's Fund, so they could get their logo on lots of UN documents and tell everyone about how keen they were on gender equality and women's issues. Just some sort of total disconnect. So also, like the United Nations accepting that money, well, they're wrong. They shouldn't be accepting that. They shouldn't just be accepting huge amounts of money. It's just like paying for advertising. You can either pay to have your advert on it before a film in the cinema, or you can give it to the UN, and they'll publish lots of things that thank you for it, and you can put that in your documents and talk about how you've worked with the UN on women's issues. But it's just another form of advertising spending. And the UN, I would imagine, are just perfectly happy with it. They're perfectly happy to take the money, and they don't really care what the company is doing. Now, one last thing he said, I thought was really interesting as well, is he said when he was at university, I think he maybe went to Harvard, and he said a lot of kids, when they think, right, I want to get into Harvard, it's really difficult. I've got the grades, but that's not enough. I need the extra something. What's the extra something? And often you think it needs to be charity work. So you get involved in a charity. Better still, you start your own charity, even though it probably doesn't really exist and it's just like your computer in your bedroom. But if you can say you've set up a charity, then obviously that really flies on your CV. And so they do that to get in. And then when they're at university, they think, right, what do I need to add to my CV to get to? So they think, yeah, I need to add some sort of charity work or environmental work or whatever. So that's what they've thought. They've never actually done anything to actually help anyone or actually get involved in anyone who needs any help. But they've got the idea that you need to burnish your credentials and get this on your CV. And then when they get into the top jobs of these businesses, they've got the same attitude. They've never actually done anything charitable. They've never been involved with anyone or any issues directly. And it's just the same thing. It's something we want on our website to say what we've done. And that's their mindset. That's all they're in. And it just reminds me of MPs, the number of candidates for election. When you say, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm involved in the local such and such a group, and I'm involved in this charity and that charity and this charity. And they're thinking, yeah, in other words, you've been preparing your CV for quite a while. If you were genuinely wanting to get involved in helping people in some sort of charitable cause, you probably wouldn't have like 3 charities on your CV. There'd be one that you've been involved in. And probably, I would say ideally, maybe you wouldn't particularly want to talk about that. But when people have just got one after another, I just think it's so transparent. You think, if they decide they don't want to get into politics after all, they'll probably drop all these things. If you ask people in these charities, so-and-so, what does he do? Oh, he came to one meeting and, yeah, we appointed him to the board, but we haven't seen him since. But, he is technically involved. I'm sure that's what it's like. And that's the mindset in big business in many cases, I feel. Yeah. Well, we've given that a good airing. Have you got any parting shots on that topic?
Well, I was just thinking that someone like Hamza Yusuf is exactly the same model where it's purely a political, it's a one-dimensional political CV, never done anything in his life. So the corporate individual who did one little bit of charity stuff has got a bit of width, a bit of width to their to themselves. But Yusuf is totally one-dimensional and a party apparatchik. He would have done well, under Stalin or something. Just groomed for a higher position, and of course Scottish family people have done lots of interesting work, lots of interesting backgrounds, and especially some of all the chairs who operate around the country, really interesting CVs, and are genuine, attractive individuals to the voter. If only we could get the breaks, and we'll be working on that. And I gather you got some really good news, didn't you? There's a lot of Twitter, big Twitter flurry in some of your work this week, Richard.
Yeah, we've grown a bit on Twitter. We've crossed the 3,000 barrier. Before Elon Musk's time, there was a cap on our Twitter following. We just kept bouncing off the same number. It was so obvious. But it seems a bit more free now. So our Twitter has been creeping up. I mean, Facebook now is really, really hard work. I mean, we're absolutely nobbled on Facebook. YouTube, I think, is about sort of as it was. Well, mind you, we were banned from YouTube a few weeks ago because of its artificial stupidity system. But yeah, just going back to Hamza Yusuf, I mean, his career path, of course, involved working for the Scottish Islamic Foundation, this organization that the Scottish government set up in order to cozy up to Muslims. It closed in financial irregularities. Some people suggested there were links with some unsavory organizations, groups as well, but financial irregularities in any case. But he was given the big career boost because he was a Muslim, because the SNP wanted to cozy up to Muslims. And then the idea was bring Hamza Yusuf to prominence in the Muslim community. Then the next thing you know, he's the SNP candidate as well in an area. So he's had the golden ticket all the way through, as you say, absolutely. Right, let's have another look how long we've got. We've got a few more minutes left. Thanks for the comments. Keep them coming in. Lucy Letby, that's been a big story this week. This nurse who's been convicted of killing, I think it was seven babies, not proven on a few, was it 6 others? Now, listening to the story, I mean, it seems quite remarkable that people have been raising the alarm for years and couldn't get anything done. But there have been doctors on the television saying, oh, yes, I kept telling my boss and they wouldn't do anything. It was very frustrating. And they told me to shut up about it. So what else could I do? So I've listened to those doctors and I've thought sometimes, well, actually, that's not good enough, mate. It's not good enough to say, oh, my boss told me I wasn't allowed to say anything. So the fact that I thought my colleague was a mass murderer, I mean, what can you do if your boss says you can't? You go to the police yourself. You cut out your boss. You go straight to the police with the story. So I haven't been entirely convinced by some of the people with those stories. And the other things about it, I mean, how did she get away with it for so long? It seems like the hospital managers were saying, "Oh, we're concerned about the reputation of the hospital." I mean, what a ridiculous stance! But that seems to be a big factor. The other thing as well, as I think Lucy Letby played the well-being card quite a bit. I think she said, "It's these people suggesting I might be like a mass murderer. It's bad for my well-being. So how dare they?" And it seems like the management were, that must be really horrible for you. So yes, we'll tell them. We'll stop them saying these terrible things. So it just seemed like that she'd played that card and it had had great effect. It reminded me of an issue I was involved in once in my employment, but I won't go into that, where a similar situation prevailed, possibly, as well. But yeah, well, what were your thoughts on the issue, Michael? Have you been following it?
Yeah, I did see she had a mum and dad came with her to some of the some of the meetings, and I mean, obviously the NHS, nobody's allowed to criticize it, and the whole thing's falling apart. If you didn't stand outside and clap the NHS, you were shouted out. So for a poor doctor within the system, I mean, I can understand why they all close ranks and don't want to listen to any internal criticism. Now, classically, that's been because of actions taken by patients. So they don't want to admit any liability. Everything's covered up. And it is not an open organization for those reasons. But it appears that that sort of secrecy and lack of accountability to the public or to the minister, and very, very poor leadership, that it is a totally closed shop. And the actions of those doctors. That was almost treasonable. But I like the way all those managers scarpered pretty quickly, didn't they? When they resigned, and I see the chief executive, he got about 6 more jobs, at 6 months a time, at 100,000 for every 6 months.
Yeah.
The risk director, I think, fled to the south of France, and who says he's not coming back to face the non-statutory investigation. So they've all sort of dispersed around the country, and they're, still done very well. But there's obviously some total disorganization and lack of cooperation between management and the medical side. And I've heard many of those stories, and it's a broken organization. It's impossible to manage.
I was Harold Shipman. When was he convicted? A few years ago now. But apparently he's the only doctor ever convicted for killing a patient in the UK. Now, I don't know if there have been other nurses. I don't know if Lucy Letby is the first nurse. Possibly not. But certainly Shipman's the only doctor has ever been convicted. But I watched it on YouTube the other week about a Dr. Adams back in the we saw late 40s, 50s, through the 50s. And to cut a long story short, it's pretty overwhelming evidence that he killed about 400 of his patients. 400. He'd get them to change their will in his favor. And then he'd sort of lock the nurse out of the room and give them an injection. And then, lo and behold, they died 2 minutes later. One of them left him her Rolls Royce in his will and things. He would take possessions from their homes as well. Then when people died, he'd send them ridiculous invoices for like 1,000 visits. And his reputation was very widely known it was in Eastbourne, very widely known in Eastbourne, that you're probably not going to last very long if he's your doctor. And he got away with it in court through the most ridiculous. The court case was totally rigged. The judge knew various people. The doctor knew various people. There was all sorts of connections and implications with it. And the court case was a total joke. And he got away with it. And he died of old age, I think in the 1980s, maybe. But I mean, look it up. Dr. Adams. I can't remember his first name. Was it Tompkin or something? But Dr. Adams got away with murder. I mean, unbelievable story. A problem with trying to convict medical staff often, particularly doctors, is they're dealing with ill people, and they're the people who've diagnosed the illness. And so the treatment, so-called, that they give is based on their own diagnosis. So it's very hard for a court to really get behind that and get any other objective information about it. This Dr. Adams as well, he would arrange the patient's cremation himself. Pretty sharpish. You get them cremated. I mean, it's ludicrous to hear the story, and then to hear at the end he got away with it. It's just, it was quite frightening. Yeah,
I shouldn't laugh, but I've always said that Harold Shipman, they'll raise a statue to Harold Shipman in Trafalgar Square. Given our move to involuntary death and euthanasia, he'll be put up as a model. So there might be some historic revisionism with Dr. Shipman. Yeah,
I wonder with Lucy Letby, I did wonder, might her motivation have been environmental? But there was, I looked at something. There's no hint that it was, but the thought crossed my mind that it might have been a factor that she thought she was saving the planet by reducing the number of people. We've had George Galloway as the candidate, haven't we? Just another. Someone was mentioning a fringe show, a comedy show about abortion. We're aware of that. Let's leave it at that for now. We're aware of that. If I could just mention one more thing before we finish, it's Perth Pride on Saturday. A couple of us are going to go along and, to get some video and just if you'd like to be involved in that, drop us an email. Well, we don't need many people, just a handful of people. If you'd like to be involved in that on Saturday, then drop us an email and we shall see. Right, thanks very much for your comments, and thanks, Michael, for sharing on that topic, and all the others as well. It's great as ever.
Yeah, good to see you. Good to see you, Richard. Thanks.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Good night.